for sure in there somewhere. Well, I think it's 10 o'clock now, and I'd be happy to introduce Tony. Tony has told me that we had a really good 60 minutes last night, and he's going to send me a link to it. But apparently the first one was about the Webb Space Telescope. And so I'm sorry I missed it last night, but I appreciate that, Tony. Tony, I should tell you, is hardly needs introducing. Most of you have heard him give talks before. He's very capable speaker, as well as has a broad contextual approach to pathways to a sustainable planet. He has been involved in major industries, from computers to motors for motorboats, I believe. Isn't that right, Tony?
Actually, it was not far from Mercury Marine that we had the plant up in Ripon, Wisconsin, which was washers and dryers. And I've been in the plant industry most of the time.
All right. Sorry, I got that.
Okay.
But I learned last week that Tony is fluent in 10 languages, and everybody kind of drew in their breath until we realized the word fluent doesn't mean he speaks these languages. It means that he's fluent in appreciating, understanding, and communicating in them. And as you can well imagine, given his background with IBM and computers, he's involved with Fortran and many other languages along those lines. But that's still breathtaking. And we really appreciate having Tony's varied interests. And he's picked one dear to my heart for this morning: homegrown national forest. So looking forward to that very much, Tony, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I did get an opportunity to watch 60 Minutes last night. It was excellent. The very first session, as far as part of that, was the James Webb Telescope and what they're discovering as far as our universe and how we're all made of stardust. It's through evolution, of course, that we came here. Now, there's some differing views on that, possibly, especially with yesterday being Easter. But let me keep focused on where we're going. The other two episodes that were in there, I didn't think as much of. Matter of fact, I thought a lot less of them, actually. But I'll send a link over to Richard. Feel free, Richard, if you want to pass it on to others. So,
okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, let me get into the presentation. In the difficulty I had at previous presentation on playing audio and videos, I believe I've got that squared away. Definitely some changes were made to both my operating system and PowerPoint and Zoom, and I had to research them a little bit better. I've tried it several times, tried it earlier this morning, so it should work, because a good part of the presentation, I'll be sharing a couple different videos with you. And I'm looking forward to interjecting at a couple key points, and also opening up at any point in time. If you want to raise your hand, or if you just raise your hand by waving it, however you want to say you like to interject, or if you feel a pause is there and appropriate to interject, I appreciate your interjection, and we can discuss those items also. So,
I'll look for the chat function, Tony.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So this presentation, what we try to identify is some of the key elements that we need to be concerned about and in embracing nature. Before I get too far into that, I'll talk a little bit about two different people that are touched on in a couple different places in this presentation. And I'll bring them up shortly. And I definitely want to talk about water. Where is it going? How much fuel is wasted managing lawns? What about fertilizer and herbicides, and what can we do? So that's the basic agenda. So the two individuals, Douglas W. Talamari, and I have a challenge of getting his name correct all the time, but in any case, he's a professor of biology, and let me get his title correct here. professor of etymology and wildlife ecology. And then there's E.O. Wilson. Many of you may know of E.O. Wilson. He was around for many, many years in his area of expertise, and he's as indicated, an American biologist, wrote several books. His last book was let's see, it was focused on creating half the world in biodiversity and being more precise in relationship to how we would get there. I recommend his books. In a couple of videos, segments that I'll share with you, you'll see his image and his book actually discussed. Before I go too far, I would like to show, it's about a 6-minute video, and if you bear with me, I'll get it started.
So, I heard you have returned to Sanderson.
If he is a man to make you truly happy, you should go to him. I lose my inheritance. I lose my independence.
Sorry about the ad. When I started this morning, it started with the ad, but I thought I positioned it. It didn't quite come up the way I thought it would.
He's a very familiar face. Can you tell us who that is?
These two individuals will introduce themselves.
Okay.
In some parts of the world.
The new report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, found that within a decade, the world is likely to miss its goal of holding global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. If or when the planet reaches that level, scientists say Earth will pass tipping points that will lead to catastrophic environmental damage, including dangerous sea level rise, entire species going extinct.
Let me pause it there. As far as tipping points, the primary person they'll be talking to here shortly will clarify tipping points a little bit more. And at 1.5 is not necessarily a specific measurement of when you hit tipping points. It's more as you, and I'll leave it continue on.
Good.
And even greater suffering in many nations, especially the poorest. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the time to act is now.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. The rate of temperature rise in the last half century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking.
So this actually is PBS NewsHour presentation that was done on March 20th, when just after that report was released.
For a closer look at the report and what can be done to change the direction the planet is headed, I'm joined by Katharine Hayhoe, climate scientist at Texas Tech University and chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Katharine Hayhoe, welcome back to the NewsHour. That is strong language from Antonio Guterres there, saying humanity is on thin ice, the climate time bomb is ticking. This is about as dire and urgent a report and a warning as we've heard. Why now?
It is completely justified. We scientists have been warning of the impacts of climate change on humans and all other life on this planet for decades, yet our carbon emissions continue to rise. As the IPCC report says, the window of opportunity we have to make decisions that will lead us to a better future is closing rapidly.
That increase in global average temperatures we've been trying to keep to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that it's often referred to as the tipping point. We seem to be hurtling towards that right now. Just as we cross that threshold, if we are to cross that threshold, help us understand, what does that mean for life here on Earth? For our viewers who have kids or grandkids, how would their lives be different?
1.5 degrees is not a magic threshold or a tipping point. Rather, it is a goal that we have set ourselves, knowing that the science is very clear. Every bit of warming matters. every little bit that the planet warms carries additional costs with it. So how much do we need to do? As much as possible. When? As soon as possible. Why? Because we will all benefit from that action.
And if we don't, paint that picture for us. What looks different here on Earth?
Well, we are already seeing the impacts here today in the way that climate change is loading the weather dice against us. We know we've always had droughts and floods and hurricanes and heat waves, but in a warming world, they're getting stronger and more dangerous. And they're impacting all of us, but they are particularly affecting those who are vulnerable and marginalized the most. The warmer the world gets, the more it endangers our food supply, our water supply, the safety of our homes, our own health, our economy and supply chains, the natural environment. Every aspect of life on Earth, including our life on Earth, is at risk the warmer this planet gets.
So this report says in order to shift course, we need to slash greenhouse gases in half by 2030 and stop adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere altogether by the early 2050s. Do you see that happening?
It is possible. If we have the will to do so, we can accomplish it. The problem we have today, though, is we still, many of us, don't really understand how this issue affects us here and now. And we don't understand that the majority of the solutions we need are already in our hand. And that's what the IPCC report makes very clear, that these changes are already affecting us, our homes, our food, our water, our economy, our cities, our states, and the solutions, efficiency, clean energy, investing in nature, adapting and building resilience. Many of those solutions are already here today as well. The only question at this point is, what are we waiting for? If we wanted to accomplish this, we could.
You know, there are some who've said there have been worse climate scenarios predicted before, some who'd said there could be a warming of 4 degrees or more sooner, which now looks unlikely. There will be some who look at this and say, well, could these predictions be wrong as well?
The previous predictions were not wrong. The uncertainty is us. The predictions were.
So, I mean, that's a key point that I thought she did a really good job of touching on it. You know, we predicted what was scientists did. I should not say we, but scientists, climate scientists indicated the potential of what might be happening as far as the future going back 20 years ago, and to continue to refine that. And they did a good job of it. And as she indicated, we're the ones that are impacting it, and we're not getting it there fast enough.
Or for what is going to happen depending on the choices we make. Prior to the Paris Agreement in 2015, the world was heading towards a future that was between 4 to 5 degrees Celsius warmer than today. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. It's 4 or 5 degrees outside or inside warmer. But think of it in terms of the human body. The temperature of the planet has been as stable as that of the human body over the course of human civilization on this planet. If our body is running a fever of 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, that is life-threatening. So we have already, thanks to the Paris Agreement, reduced the amount of change that we expect to the policies that have already been enacted by at least a degree. But we still need more because every bit of warming carries a cost with it.
These warnings, as you say, have been coming for decades. So I'm curious why you think it is that the climate threat has resided in many people's minds as a future threat, not necessarily an imminent one.
For many of us, it's because we haven't seen the impacts with our own eyes. We've heard about them. We know what's happening to polar bears or Antarctica or ice sheets, but we're not seeing it here and now. Well, that has changed. Over the last year, at least 1 in 3 Americans were personally affected by the way that climate change is making our extreme weather more severe. We might live somewhere where sea level is rising, where hurricanes are getting stronger, where wildfires burn in greater area, where the summers are now dominated by record-breaking heat waves. Climate change is no longer a future issue. It is right here where we live. It is right now, and the time to fix it is also here and now.
That is Katharine Hayhoe, climate scientist and chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I wanted to key it up, if nothing else. Each time I've talked over the years, I try to put a preface on why are we talking about what we're talking about. And myself, the key element is the Pathways to a Sustainable Planet really was a great title that we picked going back probably now 10 years ago. And I think it looks at a very diverse, not just better energies for a cooler planet, but looking at it in relationship to all aspects as far as the Earth is concerned. This particular slide and several of the slides I'll be touching on is focused in on lawns and the impact as far as lawns across the country. It isn't always greener, as they indicate in this particular slide. Going on to the next one. Unfortunately, lawns are the number one irrigated crop in America. We lawns more than anything else in our nation. Did I hear a comment?
This is Steve Shellen. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve.
I have a good friend in San Diego who for the last decade has had an artificial green grass around their home because of the water shortage. I just wanted to notice that many things in California are much different from the rest of the country here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. In relationship to AstroTurf or something of that nature, I won't go off on too much of a tangent on that, but I personally would not recommend it anywhere, and it's questionable whether it should be used on football fields and other things. I think there's the decision on that is still out in relationship to its benefit or disadvantage in various ways.
Yeah, on football fields, much of the pressure is to have a more even surface so there are fewer leg, ankle, knee, hip injuries.
Yes. So in looking at that comment as far as water is concerned, specifically, this is an indication. Bear with me. Interesting, when I share this chart, I don't see all the information. In any case, it's a chart of the amount of water that's used. And the indication is it's an acre foot. So 1 acre foot is approximately 325,000 gallons of water. And this particular chart shows that the water used across the country on various types of lawns in various areas is and gardens, whatever it might be, whatever a household is using, is almost 60 million acre feet. And it's almost mind-boggling to think of that depth, how much water is being used. If you look at the 3 different bars below that, the different types of crops that are being grown, where they either irrigated or put a sprinkler over it, however they're doing that irrigation, significantly less than what we put on our lawns, unfortunately. And I'll touch on a couple of key areas in relationship to where that's going awry, unfortunately. Here's one a clear indication of some of the issues, and specifically water. I know when I lived in Chicago and visited several major cities, including Toronto, which I also lived in for a while. Those cities, it wasn't unusual if you're walking along and seeing irrigation, primarily Chicago, as I think about it, in the suburbs of Chicago. It wouldn't be unusual that you'd have to kind of bypass or get around some of the sprinkling that was being done on sidewalks or streets, unfortunately, or driveways. And the amount of pesticides and fertilizers per acre that's being spread is 10 times more per acre than farmers do on lawns. So often people point the fingers in relationship to the green algae that we get in our lakes at farmers, and unfortunately, a good part of it are the lawns that are impacting it also due to chemical runoff, and the water gets polluted out of that. And again, bear with me because some of the information on the screen is I don't quite see it at this point in time. So, yeah, most of the water is wasted. It's either due to poor timing or poor application. Much of the water, I should say, in my opinion.
Can I add something, Tony?
Sure, definitely though. Go ahead.
Runoff. The
Yeah.
the lawns have a huge amount of runoff.
Yeah.
And their roots don't penetrate very deep, whereas you have more of a natural area of plants. They go farther deep, and you don't have that kind of wasted water runoff.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's in relationship to the different slides I'll be going through. There's a little bit of that's touched on. I know, like in Dane County, where we live, most of us live, at least not all of us, but many of us live. There's a real focus on controlling the runoff and making sure it doesn't get into the major lakes and or rivers around this area. And they're still working on it. They've got a major plan that's still underway. Anytime we do development, I'm in the town of Middleton, and I'm very active on the Park Commission. And I attend several of the board meetings associated with the town board. The developers, as they come into the community, they have to put a lot of emphasis into relationship to how they're managing that runoff. We haven't done necessarily as good a job, in my opinion, on controlling or hopefully giving them guidance on some of the other things that are happening, because the runoff's caught, but there shouldn't be runoff in the first place, which I'll get to that in a little bit later on. Of course, keeping up with the Joneses, making sure there's no dandelions coming up, making sure the mosquitoes are kept in abeyance. That's work that's going on by many a homeowner, and it's not necessarily productive work for society. So the fertilizers and chemicals, an awful lot of fertilizer can be used to keep these lawns looking lush and green, of course. The USDA estimates on average Americans buy 70 million pounds of fertilizer per year. That's mind-boggling in relation. Again, each of these statistics, when I looked into it, just amazed the heck out of me. 125 million.
Tony, that's a plural American. So you're talking about 300 million people.
Yes.
Not one person. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you divide that by 300 million, it might be a little more meaningful, right?
Yeah, I guess that's a way of putting in perspective. When I look at the environment, still the amount that's being used is way too much, unfortunately. Yeah. And then 125 million pounds of pesticides to kill grubs, ants, other insects, and we really shouldn't be killing them. Maybe mosquitoes, and you got to watch how far you go with even the mosquitoes, because they're food for other animals, of course. So, and of course, all of this stuff that we're putting on the lawn, just about all of it, is toxic to people, kids, and so I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the last time I put fertilizer down. But it was not here in the town of Middleton, because we've been here 13 years. I haven't put any fertilizer down. I'll put a corn gluten down, which is an organic substance that's going onto the lawn, acting as a fertilizer, and haven't used anything to knock out we call dandelions, other than what's called an iron mix that basically gives them a little bit too much of one thing that's good for the environment, not good for the dandelions, but more often than not, they kind of run rampant on my property. And they look pretty in the spring. I do use a lawnmower, unfortunately, to cut them down. I'll touch on that a little bit more later. So fuel, lawn and fuel. Right here, there's an estimate that over 17 million gallons of fuel, mostly gasoline, of course, is spilled each year while refueling lawn equipment. I'm not sure if you've gone to the gas station. I have. I continue to, and I'll tell you why a little later on. But when I fill up my 2.5 gallon or 5 gallon tank, I get a little bit of overflow if I don't watch it very closely, of course. So I've gotten to the point where I generally get about 2 gallons or 4.5 gallons, depending on which one I'm using, and don't get that overflow. And then when you pour it into the gas tank for the lawnmower, unfortunately, you get spillage. And as it indicated here, we're wasting more fuel fueling those lawnmowers than the Exxon Valdez impacted in the Gulf of Alaska when that happened quite a few years ago now. And I didn't find a clear statistic because I'm not sure they have a good measurement on it, but maybe if I didn't look far enough, how much fuel is being used on lawnmowers in total. But I'm sure it's way too much.
If I may add
Sure.
that, Tony, there are two types of lawnmowers. There are 2-cycle engines and 4-cycle engines. And the 2-cycle ones, which I think are still being used, are very inefficient, putting out actual unconsumed fuel and polluting our air terribly. And they're now selling electric lawnmowers, which last a lot longer than I can last mowing the lawn. They're quite durable.
I'll put a perspective. I had an electric lawnmower and used that electric lawnmower, but it was a cord electric lawnmower, probably for 30 years. Because when I was in Ripon, Wisconsin, our property as far as lawn was small. The property that we had when we moved out to Spokane, Washington, same thing, very small as far as the property was concerned. When we moved over to Seattle, again, property was very small. It's only that when I moved here to the town of Middleton that our acreage has grown significantly. And although I use that electric lawnmower a little bit, it really isn't practical for our people.
Sure.
And how many times could you nick the cord?
I never nicked the cord. I'm very fortunate. I positioned outlets around our property that were very amenable towards cutting the lawn with that particular device. I have looked at an electric lawnmower, but I'm really focused in on how can I eliminate the need for cutting the lawn at all. And I'm not there yet, but I'm moving in that direction.
Good.
Let's see. So I don't mean to pick on golf because let me put it in perspective. I used to golf every day when I first started golfing as a teenager. I had a brother-in-law that was much older than I was. He was a good golfer. And he got me interested. I got turned on to it. And there was a point in time, like I say, I was playing golf every day. I played many golf courses around the country. And in the process of playing on them, unfortunately, an awful lot of waste occurs associated with what's happening on golf courses. And as this indicates, just the average 18-hole golf course has 150 acres. 95 acres of that need to be maintained, and approximately 35 acres or 36% of the turf is intensively maintained, where it's greens, tees, and fairways. Now, the only plus is there is 26 acres of naturalized areas and 6.4 acres of water feature, which I'm not sure too much actually grows in those water features because of all the runoff they get. I've played on some great courses around the country, some of which were extremely tight, where there was very little grass. It was continuing to be lined with tree lines. The greens were short. The tees and the greens were small. I played in Arizona, where there's basically you have to hit from one patch of grass to another patch of grass, but they still have to use a lot to get there. I stopped golfing many years ago. So I haven't golfed since I've been here in the town of Middleton, which is over 13 years now. So what I'm going to touch on now is several different snippets of the, actually each one of them I think probably runs a minute. The first one's a very short, and then next one's a couple minutes, and then the next one runs a little longer. the whole video is 46 or so minutes. When I send links out to Richard, I'll include that link also. So that if you want to see the whole video, you're more than welcome to watch the whole thing. So bear with me.
Yep.
Hopefully the sound's coming across to everybody. I think I turned my volume up as high as possible. So if it's too loud for you, you can adjust it at your location. I also have the closed captioning that's running on all of the videos too.
Okay.
This one's a real short one.
Before I do that, though, I want to talk about some of the things that I get to see regularly at my house. This is one of them. Reminds me when I see this on a leaf of a bird feet national park. That is exactly what I want to talk about today. It's a small nonprofit. I want to talk about how it came into being, what our goals are, and particularly what the rush in terms of joining Homegrown National Park is.
So that's just a basic introduction of Doug, and he is the speaker as I go through each of these portions of the video, and he talks about what he got started with a neighbor back in 2007 rather, and it definitely has grown significantly across the country.
Tony,
Yes.
I'm getting a video area of your PowerPoint with a small section shows Homegrown National Park. Can you make the video cover a larger portion?
Okay. Let's see if I can do.
I don't know if I'm special or.
Yeah, let me ask other people. Do you see the video?
No, I only hear his voice, didn't see any video at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I only hear audio also.
okay, bear with me.
Right now I'm seeing the PowerPoint around the screen with Homegrown National Park
Okay.
and
Well,
two bullet points.
yeah.
Now we see a video.
Okay.
Much better. Can you expand it to the full screen?
I can. Bear with me.
Good, perfect.
Wonderful.
Now I'll have to keep on going back and forth to get that accomplished. So let me go ahead.
We've got patience.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware, co-founder of Homegrown National Park. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today. It's a small nonprofit. I want to talk about how it came into being, what our goals are, and particularly what the rush in terms of joining Homegrown National Park is.
Now, his video, like I say, is almost an hour, more than 45 minutes. He does an excellent job. He has some great pictures of things that are on his property. And I highly recommend it, but I don't want to show that complete video here. So I'll be breaking in and out as we go along. So.
Tony,
Yes.
we're seeing just an image of Tallamy, the sort of the introduction, the video itself, the voice is working, but the video isn't running as a video.
Not yet. He hasn't started it yet.
Oh, yes, I did start it. So bear with me again.
Okay. I'm sorry, didn't realize you had.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're seeing a picture of a house.
Yeah.
But no audio.
No.
Right now I'm going into a different section, so bear with me.
Okay.
So you see a picture of a house now?
We see a house with
Okay.
words, and we now see a audio, a line.
Okay.
Matter of fact, there's very little that's happening on a typical residential landscape in the U.S. And the problem, of course, is that we got 135 million acres of those typical residential landscapes that were designed for aesthetics, but not for ecological function.
So I'll ask, is it definitely coming across now video?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, switching back and forth to full size I have to do some adjusting to get there, but looks like it's working out.
And that's why we're seeing lots of headlines these days, very unhappy headlines, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. 2/3 of Earth's wildlife is already gone. The UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. 40% of Earth's plants face extinction. Not good news at all. And that is why Elizabeth Kolbert gets to write The Sixth Extinction. Talking about the sixth great extinction event this planet has ever experienced. We are right in the middle of it. And of course, it's the first one that's caused by an animal, us.
I'm not sure if any of you had the opportunity, but going back several years ago, slightly after she wrote that book, she was in town and spoke to a group at UW.
Yeah, we saw that. She's a good speaker.
Yes, she is.
There are actually people studying our reaction to biodiversity losses. It's upsetting to a lot of people. Richard Hobbs is one of them. And he says that our reaction has been very similar to the 5 stages of grief that we experience when we get the news we have a terminal disease. First stage is denial. No, we don't have the disease. But there's certainly a lot of denial that we don't have any issues with biodiversity. Anger. A lot of people are upset about it. I'm one of them. Bargaining, what can we do to fix it? Depression, yeah, you got to fight that all the time. The 5th stage is acceptance. And this is where I'm going to push back. Acceptance is equivalent to giving up, as if there's nothing we can do about it. And giving up's not an option here, folks, because nature is not optional. If we want to remain on this planet, we need to have natural systems. So I'm going to propose a 6th action, or a 6th stage, and that would be action. We actually can improve the situation. Now, we do have parks, we do have preserves. Our national parks in particular, beautiful, wonderful places. They were established because they were beautiful places. It was really an exercise in preserving exquisite scenery, the best scenery that we have in the entire country. And Teddy Roosevelt had a lot to do with that. He said the establishment of the National Park Service is justified by the considerations of good administration. So Teddy was patting himself on the back there. The value of natural beauty as a national asset, and the effectiveness of outdoor life and recreation in the production of good citizenship. In other words, our parks were created because they were pretty places for us to play in. And that's a fine reason. They're beautiful places for us to play in, but conservation was not the major issue. And that's why we've only preserved 3.6% of the U.S. in national parks. 12% is federally protected. But that leaves, more than 80% of the country that does not have federal protection. And what's happening in that 80% is appalling. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's natural areas disappears to development. Development, the most oxymoronic word in all of ecology. We've got 44 million acres of lawn in this country. That's an area the size of New England. We have paved over an area larger than Ohio, and that's a very old statistic, so I'm sure it's much larger than Ohio at this point. 2 million acres of golf courses, which is an area larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. We could go on with crazy statistics like that. None of them are acceptable. Well, let's ask why our parks and preserves are not sustaining the biodiversity that we need. And there are a couple of reasons, but this is the big one. They're too small. They're too small. When you take a large area like this and you shrink it down to a little patch, a little habitat patch, and this is an exaggeration, you're taking large populations and shrinking them down to small or tiny populations. And that's the problem, because small populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. That's because all populations fluctuate. In good times, they go up. In bad times, they go down. If you're a large population, even in your down cycle, there's enough individuals so you can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, you're going to fluctuate just like all populations, and you often hit zero. You blink out of your little habitat patch, and unless you can recolonize, that's called local extinction. And recolonization is very tough these days because it's so inhospitable outside of these preserves. Imagine a box turtle crossing Route 95. It's not going to happen.
So, like I say, throughout this video, there's various pictures that I think are exquisite in relationship to nature and animals, and I've had the opportunity to visit many of the national parks across the country, and they are beautiful, but they're not enough. And the next section will touch on that.
Numerous bird on the entire planet, but it was gone long before any of us were born. So shifting baseline is very common, and it means that we're losing our biodiversity, the biodiversity that sustains us, and we don't even notice it. So we have to do something about it. What shall we do? Well, a lot of people are interested in biodiversity these days, including the UN. The UN, its meeting just had a big conference in Canada. But this is a headline from that conference. Crucial negotiations to protect biodiversity are moving at a snail's pace. We're negotiating whether or not we're going to protect what keeps us alive on this planet. Well, Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson from Harvard, a very famous professor. He died 2 years ago at this point. He's not going to wait for the UN to make a resolution. He had an extremely long career, and a lot of it was focused on saving life on planet Earth. He loved biodiversity, and he wanted to save it, not because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival.
So he actually wrote that Half Earth in 2016. I did listen to it on an audio book. A good part of it is his history and what he was involved with over the years. And then it touches on and goes through more thoroughly what he thinks needs to happen in relationship to half the Earth back to wildlife.
I did a short review of that book.
Huh?
I did a short review of that book a few years back too. Like you, I'm highly impressed with him.
Yeah, rightfully, I would agree. Pretty amazing individual and his story.
So in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And he had one simple message. If we're going to save life, if we're going to save nature anywhere on the planet, we're going to have to save nature on at least half of the planet. And when I say life, I'm talking about human life as well. So we're going to have to put half of the planet aside. Functioning ecosystems will have to be happy on half of planet Earth. It's a very bold statement, and he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's good news. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all the things that are declining or disappearing can be in that half, and it'll be wonderful. Problem is, half of planet Earth is already in some form of agriculture, half of terrestrial Earth. We're certainly not going to use that to save biodiversity. Now, we've got 8 billion people. And all of our roadways and highways and airports and detritus in the other half. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we actually do this? How can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation to do that. We've got to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist. This is, we've had that idea for eons. We can't exist in the same place at the same time. Well, what I want to argue today is that not only is living with nature an option, it's now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. So we have to practice conservation, not just in pristine areas like this, but in areas like this.
So the picture that just went by associated with the development of housing and many of the areas throughout Dane County, more often than other areas, because I think Dane County has an interest in trying to change that. Each time properties are developed here in the town of Middleton, There is an attempt to keep any trees that are in those properties currently, any major trees, oaks, ash, whatever, still identified as being required to stay there, and if they're of a certain size.
In other words, we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every single year, but thrive. Here's the problem. With all of our development, we have fragmented viable habitat, and we got little teeny habitat patches scattered all around. Now, the proposal is to make biological corridors that connect those habitats so that the populations within them can move back and forth, hopefully connecting them to the point where if one habitat has a problem, they're not cut off from another habitat. But the size of the habitat is still tiny, which means the populations are still tiny, which means when they fluctuate, there is still the risk of extinction. So I think we have to go beyond this model of biological corridors and actually create viable habitat, not just places for plants and animals to move, but viable habitat where they can live and breed and reproduce outside of the habitats that remain. This is good. This is even better. We want to put as many plants back to create viable habitat outside of preserved areas.
So in his approach, each one of these little dots is an actual personal property of some home, a business, whatever it is, with the appropriate plants, trees, whatever, that are native to the area and are beneficial to the environment and nature as a whole, in order to connect at various locations.
Tony, could I say something?
Sure. Yes.
I've become aware through some of the news that I read that homeowner associations, which are quite prevalent, particularly in the eastern part of the United States, are a significant problem for individuals to improve their property to be more nature friendly. Are you going to cover that at all?
I don't have anything specific on that in it, but I agree with you. There are homeowner associations that require that you cut your lawn, you have to have it manicured in such a way. They have a clear indication that you can't have certain types of roofs on your house, even in some places. It's unfortunate. So, I don't have a specific, and he doesn't necessarily touch on that.
They also restrict the type of gardening plants that you can have and things of that sort.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Not the right direction to go, in personal opinion.
The less planted areas will be, our cities and our agriculture. But the more we do this, the more viable habitat will be outside of these parks and preserves, connecting them, and the populations will be able to grow and not be as vulnerable to local extinction. But to achieve this, we're talking about practicing conservation on private property, which means we're going to have to reevaluate our attitude towards property rights. We do have this idea that we can own part of the earth and that we have the right to do anything we want on that piece of the earth. Unfortunately, our yards are not like Las Vegas. Now, you all know that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, what happens in our yards does not stay on our yards. That is the ecological problem here. That's because our properties, our yards, are part of local ecosystems. So whatever we do to them impacts the entire ecosystem that surrounds us. So for example, let's say you have a lot of lawn. The amount of lawn you have is going to determine whether rain infiltrates.
I can definitely say that in various areas of the country I've lived, I've seen properties almost identical to this without the trees in the background, unfortunately. And I've also seen a couple of developments around the Madison, Dane County area that have this type of emphasis over the years, and it's not the right direction to go.
Traits and recharges your local watershed, groundwater, or whether it leaves as stormwater runoff. It's going to determine whether you're adding nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides, all those pollutants to your local watershed. It's going to determine how much carbon you're adding to the atmosphere every single time you mow. How you landscape is going to determine whether or not you're supporting pollinator populations, or whether
So this particular one I'll skip over. It's basically how you get on the map. Basically, with his homegrown national park, you're able to go in. You put. Let me run it because it's only a matter of a couple seconds.
ORG. And the feature of our nonprofit is to get people to register their properties on, we call it on the map. It's free, so there's no, it doesn't cost anything. You register your location and the amount of area on your private property that you're going to start to be a good steward of. Maybe you're going to reduce the area of lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Any of it counts. Maybe you're just going to make a commitment to do these things. Then your little piece of your county is going to light up, and you'll get to see who else in your county has joined Homegrown National Park. The object, of course, is to get the message that everybody, particularly all the people that don't have a clue about this, is the future of conservation. We want that message to go viral, to reach everybody in the country.
So I go on to one more section.
Significant increase in the biodiversity that our property is supporting. Measurable reduction in invasive species. So if you have a lot of invasive species on your property, you've got to get rid of those and replace them with the important native plants. Remember, if 78% of the country is privately owned, or 85% east of the Mississippi is privately owned, and everybody got rid of the invasive plants.
So what he's touching on there is that there's in the other parts of this particular presentation, he talks on the size of the country in relationship to what percentage is owned by farmers and what percentage is actually identified as the rangeland, and what can we be doing with each of these areas. But the majority of the country still is property that's owned by personal people, and each person should be looking at their area and what they might be able to do to accommodate a better potential future for the world.
It's a nice looking picture there,
No,
Tony, of somebody's yard. It's takes a lot of planning, but it would be great if we could think more and more of gradually reducing yards. I have a neighbor who is a former professor of zoology here, and he's just gradually reducing the lawn. Every year there's less lawn and more gardens, more wild gardens and that sort of thing. It's a nice idea, but it takes a lot of thought and planning. And of course he has the knowledge and the money to do it.
yeah. Now there are individuals that are out there that can help you get that in that direction. And I want to say touch on any that I know of, although we've dealt with a couple of contractors that do that type of thing. So
It saves you time mowing.
yes, it does, no doubt about it. So right now you should see a large oak tree.
Yes, you do.
Okay, very good. So this is an indication of what are the appropriate plants and trees that you should be looking at putting on your property. Not necessarily how to do the development of all of it, but just at least take these into consideration in regards to what you have on your own property. Here's it's still in a kind of a beta site. When I went to it, it indicates what's the appropriate trees and plants that you should plant. And it does it by zip code. So when you put your zip code in, it'll list the appropriate trees and plants that you should be planting on your property.
Nice.
Doesn't give you an overall layout necessarily, but there are resources out there that can do that.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of just planting one tree, potentially. And plan may be another tree in another year or two, and positioning it on your property, and just so that's it's the appropriate location for it.
Let me tell you a little something that I did just 2 days
Sure.
ago. Tony. You may recall there's a ammunition plant called Sauk Prairie Conservation Area where they forced farmers off the fields to grow to make ammunition.
Yep.
Well, as you know, that was given back to the Department of Natural Resources as well as our indigenous natives for part of the area. And since then, a guy by the name of Kurt Miney has worked with that group and grafted apple trees from the original farmers. Those apple trees were still around. They hadn't been chopped down by the ammunition people. And there are a couple of cemeteries still left back there too. Anyway, so they've taken these apple trees and they've grafted them into little trees. And I bought a tree there a couple of days ago and planted it in the middle of my yard. And it's just a fun little project to do. Helps to support them with a little donation. And at the same time, you've got this ancient apple tree that goes back over 100 years grafted onto a younger root that will give you a feeling of heritage. Nice little.
And of course, we took a tour of that facility not that long ago, a few years ago.
Yes, we did. Right.
So he makes several key things. Of this one, he happened to pick up from a student that was taking a class with them last semester. This video was done, I think, in January of this year or December of last year. Relatively recent. And the particular student, while conservatives claim to be managing species and habitat, what we are actually managing people. We need to look at ourselves and others and give them some good ideas. And that's what I'm trying to suggest at this point in time and what might be beneficial to do as far as with your own properties or encouraging some of your neighbors possibly. This is one of the last couple of slides that Doug touches on in his presentation. And it kind of, says shrink the lawn, put native plants in rather than lawn, modify your lights. He touches on lights and the impact of making sure that you have the LEDs, so you benefit to the private. And if you have any lights left on outside, they should be of the warm light or yellow light spectrum, which is much better for insects. It overall that helps with pollinators and make sure that what you're putting in your flower beds or whatever, again, native and possibly benefit a pollinator that comes through our area. Remove invasive plants, add keystone plants. Keystone plants are ones that help the migration back and forth associated across the country and getting both birds and other types of animals that might be moving through, more so insects, so butterflies and others, of course. Eliminate the concept of trying to get rid of mosquitoes, but he touches on a method in his video of how, if you're going to try and do it ecologically, it's a much better approach than using the sprays that unfortunately happen. And then join the Homegrown National Park website and indicate what you're doing, even if it's just planting a plant out on your if you have an apartment with a balcony, put a plant out there. We had a townhouse when we lived in outside Toronto, and we had plants out on that along with vegetables that we grew out on that particular outside balcony. So, so it's possible.
Toronto apartments are famous for their balconies.
Yes. So a book that I listened to not too long ago is Forest Bathing. It may sound a little bit unusual. It's written by Dr. Quingy Lee, and in looking at what he's researched for many, many years and has developed very extensively throughout Japan, are areas where forest bathing occurs. And they're primarily national parks, mostly focused on forests as being the prevalent environment of those particular parks. Shokin Yuki is forest bathing. There's various indications of where you can go to do that. I use 2 locations. I used Pope Farm. It's not really a forest per se, but it's a nice area to walk around. And the Ice Age Park, which is only a matter of 2 blocks from me, is another 100 acres. Like Pope Farm is about 100 acres. The Ice Age Park, that's located right off of Mountain View Road in the town of Middleton, is 100 acres. It's a combination of prairie and forest area. Excellent to walk through. And the environment that you're walking through, the tranquility, the benefits personally to yourself is fairly significant. So although we acquired a dog, let's see, she's a little over 3 years old now, and it's changed our habits a little bit in relationship to where we walk that dog, primarily because she's got a little bit of hound in her. She's a mixed breed, and she likes to smell a lot. So we've got more on some of the paved paths rather than some of the outside paths. We're training her to do something different in the long term. So we're getting there. So I have one more video that I'm going to show you. So bear with me.
The 2020s, things were never the same after that. That's when we saved the world. Only we almost didn't.
It all changed once we realized the difference working with nature could make. Back then, we were all about electric cars, renewable energy, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. And they were all crucial, but on their own, they never would have been enough. We were already facing an extinction-level threat. We thought we were doing a lot, but we needed to do even more.
So in order to make this full screen, I have to go to YouTube. And if I go to YouTube, we're liable to get advertisement. I don't want to click so full screen. Good. The key thing here is that this is talking about the future and what's possible in relationship to what the Nature Conservancy is promoting at this point in time. So
excellent. Go for it.
Enter nature. The most sophisticated system for processing greenhouse gases in the universe only had hundreds of millions of years on us. We had to stop the planet from warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the start of the 20th century. Turns out we had to be kind to nature. Hear me out. Stopping the destruction of existing forests, grasslands, and wetlands pulled 3.9 billion metric tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. Smarter farming and forestry techniques cut another 5.1 billion tons. And restoring the forests and wetlands we had lost scrubbed another 2. That's 11 billion tons of carbon removed from the atmosphere. That's like a string of SUVs stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic stretching from here to the moon 56 times over. That's 1/3 of the emission reductions we needed. How's it work though? Pick a tree. Any tree. Look closer. Trees do this awesome thing called photosynthesis where they soak up rays of sun and pluck carbon from the air to feed themselves. They literally eat the stuff that traps heat in our atmosphere. And have you heard of mangroves? They're like trees, but they live along the coast near bays and beaches. They became all the rage when word got out they could store 5 times more carbon than their landlocked counterparts. Plus, as
That's one that I didn't know until I watched this video.
Yeah.
I knew the benefit of mangroves, don't get me wrong. I didn't realize that it was that significant as far as how much carbon
they age, trees, all plants really, deposit their carbon into soil. Other plants use that to grow, some of which get eaten by animals, like us, which release carbon back into the atmosphere, starting the whole process over again. It's called the carbon cycle, and it worked really well for a really long time until we overloaded the system by burning fossil fuels and cutting down too many of our forests. It can look very natural now, but protecting and restoring nature at a global level was one of the hardest things we've ever done, and we still had to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. But once we realized it would take more than switching to renewable energy, once we really partnered with nature to reduce our carbon footprint, and also to live on a better planet,
That's when we really started to save the world.
Okay, getting near to that's the videos that I was going to present to you at this point in time. Only a few more slides, but I could show a couple more besides. This is something scientifically I've not been able to find a full reference, but I heard it several times over the year. Around the arrival of Columbus, it was said that squirrels could travel from tree to tree from the Northeast to the Mississippi without ever having to touch the ground. This is according to an arborist out in New York. I heard that several times, never was able to find an actual reference where they could say that definitely was the case. So on that, plant a tree, give a squirrel a chance to get around. So I know with ours, they're expanded their amount of space that they can go to from one location to another on our property at this point in time. So, okay, so additional discussions. I've got a couple other slides I could share with you. Any other comments or thoughts?
Well, I have one thought, if I could chip in now, and that is about the Nature Conservancy. I want to tell you, Tony, that was an excellent video. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned some new things as you did. I'm going to be talking about mangroves this fall. And so I'm very empathetic to that issue. But I'm really disappointed with the Nature Conservancy in one crucial way, and you might already guesstimate what that is. Dr. Hayhoe is opposed to nuclear energy. They talk about renewable as though that's the be-all and the end-all. They're not inclusive. And when people do get around to mentioning nuclear, they include it with carbon capture and batteries, which are projects of the future. And we've been turning our back on nuclear energy for 70 years. And if we think we're going to do it with renewables alone, it's really a mistaken concept. We're never going to accomplish getting the energy we need with renewables. So I find that aspect of the Nature Conservancy regrettable, even though I really like the video.
Let me touch on a couple things. One of which is Catherine Hayhoe. I'm not sure what her current stance is on that, but I know in the video she talks about clean energy.
Good.
If you identify clean energy, you're including nuclear, and most scientists realize when they do make that statement. I do know from the website, unfortunately, they still talk about green energy on their website as far as the that particular organization. So,
well, Madison is full of green organizations. We've got 350.org, we've got Sierra Club. And there, I've offered to speak to these organizations at their board of directors about nuclear energy. They don't even want me to come and talk to it. Maybe somebody else could, but I think Madison's a wonderful town, and Middleton, and we're very green, but there's something wrong with our green concepts. We need to stop being exclusive and realize that there are serious limits to renewables.
Yes.
So that bugged me a bit, but other than that, I salute what the Nature Conservancy is doing and supported them for years.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in it. I've followed them for years, and whether they're changing or not, like I say, I know she talks about clean energy, and hopefully she's changed her opinion along that lines. I see Dottie has her hand raised.
Yes, it's not a very deep question, but I was wondering whether you had any pictures of what you might have done on your own property.
Those are
to show us.
I do have a couple pictures I could definitely show you.
Thank you. Good question, Dottie.
Any other thoughts? Yes, Don.
Yeah, I would like to point out that we have to reverse the impetus in changing our society to the use of engines. I remember in my youth, I made money by mowing lawns.
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't have to deal with gasoline or anything else.
No.
Now that was, well, it's been a long time, but nonetheless, it's characteristic. The ATMs are overdone. Snowmobiles are overdone. There's no real difference involved in lifestyles. And, that's really a bad situation. In order to reverse it, it's going to take an equal effort, and it's going to be very hard. Now, beyond that, it has become evident to me, at least, that if we were to make the rules different than the rules of the homeowners that have to plant grass and you have to cut it, you should make rules that really shift appliances to electricity.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to cut down all the emission, and it can be done, and without changing immediately our lifestyle. So why isn't it done? I mean, that's what I feel we are not going to change our path to extinction, not of necessarily people, but certainly of our civilization.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the only way that, well, there's multiple ways that can happen. I shouldn't say the only way. One of which is, legislating it, making sure that building codes and property codes encourage people to go in the right direction rather than a direction. And some of the different types of machinery that we do have that are primarily for play, it would be a lot better off physically, personally, if we didn't have those types of toys and we used our feet more so than some of those snowblowers or whatever, snowmobiles and ATVs and things of that nature. So, and yes, it unfortunately is widespread. The snowmobiles might go by their wayside only because we won't have snow at some point in the future. Good comments, Don. Anything else?
Let me look at the Alan has made a comment, Alan Pentecoff. He says there are several organizations that give away trees. You don't necessarily have to buy them. I've grown 2 red oaks from such trees.
Yeah.
And he said notices about availability are often found in local and weekly newspapers. So
Good point, Alan. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, let's see. We can continue on the discussion. I'll show you a couple more slides.
yeah, that would be great.
Okay, this is our property going back a few years ago. We have just under an acre. When we arrived here, we had, I'll point out a couple of things. That's a pin oak, that's a red oak, and that's a white oak on our property. We've had another oak that you don't see on the property that was planted a couple of years ago. We have a maple, and I think it's a red maple. That's a sugar maple. We have quite a few understory trees that you don't see. That happens to be a red bud. We've got several red buds over here. We have several areas underneath here where we have our deck, and along our deck, they're all natural growths that we did a few years ago. Here's a picture. You see an indication of our garden in this area. There's been some thought that we might expand these are apple trees. And I should say, with a corner lot, we have an acre, but in addition, the perimeter of the lot that the town owns, but we have to manage, and it's restricted as far as how you manage that. There's a total of another, let's see, what would that be? Better than a third of an acre. So we're probably closer to 1 1/3 acres that we're actually managing as far as property is concerned. The next picture is a little bit different. This is also our property. This ash tree, in the summertime, it shades all of our deck and the roofing, so we can't put any solar panels on top of the roof because they wouldn't get much sun in the summertime. That ash tree, we treated for emerald ash borer. It has no other impact other because it's injected into the tree itself. It only does impacts the emerald ash borer, and that's it. Down in this area here, we have all natural prairie plants, and we planted a bur oak in this area here not too long ago. These are additional bushes that we've added on. There's several areas that we've changed the vegetation around the property that are more natural rather than what was here before. We have another oak, maple tree that we planted here. This sugar maple it's near its end. It's losing several of its limbs. We'll continue to nurture it. We have both the last few years, we have nesting woodpeckers that land in that particular tree. So as long as possible, we'll leave them continue to nest each year in that tree. And the new maple is planted not too far from it. We'll be planting another tree in this area, probably not too far in the future. We've got in this area is an ironwood and a bush. We planted a musclewood over on this side here that you can't see in this particular picture. Let's see. Across the, I'm going to go back one. Across this side of our white pines, they're 35 to 40 feet tall. There are a total of 14 of them, 15 of them rather, and one of them just came down. We're down to 14 now. With that heavy wind we had last fall, unfortunately, it caught the top of one of the tallest one and brought it down. We'll be replacing that. So,
are those drone pictures?
These no, these are not. This is Google picture.
Okay.
And the other picture I showed you is property development. This one's maintained by Dane County, and every few years they'll take a new picture. This one was taken in the fall, late fall of 2022. So just last year. Okay.
If you mean to say those are taken from space?
No, well, let's see.
Probably
Yeah,
drones, right?
these are probably taken by a satellite.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, Google Maps has done a great job, and this,
Yeah.
now I think it's probably still satellite pictures that they get, Dane County gets.
Yeah.
That's a picture of our garden, and we're changing the garden and not do this in the future. We put this in over 12 years ago when we came into, and blueberries back here.
Nice.
Those are a couple of the ash trees. Those are the apples trees. And then the beds, this is late last fall.
Very nice.
Can I ask you another question?
So sure.
You put a lot of emphasis on planting trees, but I know I've been involved, not so much recently, but with prairie organizations, and they really feel that maintaining prairie is important, and trees have to be, carefully worked into the landscape so that you have a mixture of prairie with the trees, and the trees and shrubs don't take over. So are you universally saying everybody should plant trees, or what?
First off, I'd say it's the easiest step to embrace what we've talked about today is to plant a tree. But definitely prairies, the area that we have, but it's a small area. It's probably 25 by 30 at this point in time. And we expect to grow this area. That's all prairie plants. We planted 150 prairie plants in there. In addition, there is a bur oak that's in the middle of it. So it will be classified as an oak savanna prairie area.
Okay.
Over time. So I agree with you. In the town of Middleton at our conservancies, prairies are prevalent in those particular areas. And prairies are prevalent in this area. And I didn't touch on that statistic. It's something like 3% of the areas that had been prairies and marshlands in Wisconsin are left in comparison to the amount of space that was there originally. I think it's like better than half of you think of woods throughout Wisconsin, but better than half of it was prairie and marshland years ago, and we've developed most of that area out at this point in time. So going back to prairies is a great idea, Dottie. No doubt about it.
Are you near Cherrywood or in it?
Yeah, no, we're outside of Cherrywood. We're on off of Mound View and Valley View.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to point out that it's not to shift back to prairies. The prairies developed for a long time, thousands of years, by having fire. And it has to be burned off periodically. And that is a touchy question. To get rid of invasive plants, that burning is going to be useful. But that again is putting up carbon dioxide again. So it's a real difficulty of how to balance these things, and the complexity of the solutions. There's no smoking gun.
No. Don, I agree with you. That's not my area of expertise at all, but my impression, and I know one or two individuals that are actively involved with burning prairies. And they promote it in the sense, first off, what you're burning off is just that which is above ground. And the majority of what happens is that the sequestering underground of the carbon is more significant than what is burned off. And overall, as far as the environment, if it wasn't a lightning strike, it was the Native Americans that were igniting prairies so that they could grow their plants. And it has a balance to nature is what I understand. But again, that's not my area of expertise at all. So I'm still a proponent of prairies. I think more often it's just easier to plant a tree. So
And then I like meadows, Tony, because
Yeah.
meadows are a lot easier to handle. You just stop mowing
Yeah.
and keep an eye on the goldenrod and the asters and make sure that there's lots of them around for the butterflies. A lot less work and a nice lazy way to do part of your lawn.
So
Just let it become a meadow.
Yeah, definitely a good approach. Leave it go back to nature, basically. And we attempt to do a step in that direction as far as the grass that we do have, and we do what's called no mow May. So I won't pull my lawnmower out until the yellow flowers are starting to turn white, those dandelions.
Good.
To try and make sure they don't go into the neighbors' areas. But it definitely saves more than a month of cutting the grass because I've had a neighbor or two already out cutting their grass, believe it or not, at this point in time. And we won't touch the lawnmower like it did until sometime mid to late May. So.
You also raised an interesting question, Tony, about watering your lawns. We used to water our lawns back in the 80s and getting into the late 80s, around 1990 or so. Since 1990, we've had so much rain, we haven't had to even pull the sprinkler off the wall, especially since the turn of the century. Do you not find the same sort of thing in your area?
Yeah, definitely. We have not put water on the lawn other than if we put seed down.
Yeah.
One thing that we're doing underneath the lawn right now is putting on what's called micro clover, which also is very good for the environment. And over time, it will reduce the need to cut and or reduce the grass that's there.
Okay. Well, I find that very interesting and provocative talk, Tony. I really appreciated it. Any further thoughts and questions? It's 11:27. We've got a little more time if anybody would like to chip in a thought or a question.
Looks like Don.
Again, I'd like to, I visited a long time ago, well, 30, 40 years ago, the people that are living on the U.S. Virgin Islands. And there are no wells. So there's no underground water, nothing. They have to live with whatever water comes in. Now they have an alternate system of so-called gray water, which is done by using important chemicals which can be absorbed and are not malevolent. And they use that on the plants. And so it really is without changing really the environment, they've made incredibly useful, efficient use of water. And that illustration could be done in other places. In fact, it is done by some cities out in Colorado in which the water is treated and released back into the Colorado. But it should be much more involved in a national plan.
Yeah, Don, I said years ago, I used to golf. They use gray water on golf courses in several areas where they're not, it's basically water that they're able to trap the runoff water, and they use that to water themselves. So they're reducing their impact as far as the environment. The other thing is we have not taken this approach because of our asphalt roof. It's a water barrel that you put along in conjunction with your gutter system, and you capture water and redisperse that water into your plants, not necessarily your vegetables, but other plants around your property. And it's an effective use of cycling the water, and a better approach than just letting it run off. So And they're fairly they're about $100, I should say, a rain barrel to capture them. Any other comments or any other thoughts on any other subject that we might discuss?
I could just announce next week's speaker, if I might. James Kunka will be talking to us next Monday. He's a scientist in the field of earth and environmental sciences, specializing in geologic disposal of nuclear waste, energy-related research, planetary surface processes, radiobiology, and shielding for space colonies. He's been involved in a lot of things, and he's offered to speak to us twice, once this fall on October the 3rd, and also next week. The one next week is going to be, I think, a fascinating topic, disposing of some myths, and quite broad, not just focusing on nuclear, but putting a lot of these things that we've raised today into perspective. So I hope you'll all attend that. And Dottie will be talking, I think, the week after that about dams, hydroelectric dams, and just dams that aren't involved in electricity that need to be removed. So she's warned me that my distaste for dam removal might be challenged as she when she's thinking about offering this course, and this talk, and I'm very glad that she's doing it. So we've got some good talks lined up, a couple more this spring, and I want to thank you, Tony, for a really interesting one today. I enjoyed it immensely.
Very good. Thank you also for having us.
Oh, couldn't do it without. It's been great. In fact, at a recent meeting of the Friends of Fishing, we got together and really polished off a nice agenda for this fall. And I'm thankful to all of you who are participating at both levels, both PLATO and Friends of Fishing, that really helps to, I appreciate getting the agenda together ahead of time, so I like to plan a little bit in advance. And so we've got an agenda for the fall already. And if any of you don't have it or have any questions, don't hesitate to email me and I'll get it out to you. But it's been a nice run through. I sometimes wonder how are we going to come up with 10 more talks in a few months, but they just materialize. Everybody's jumping in, and I appreciate it very much. So I guess we'll let it go for this week. Thanks again, Tony. It was great.
You're quite welcome.
Okay.
Y'all have a good day.
Yep. And thank you for the links. I'll send them around.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Bye. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.